Good morning, brothers and sisters, and a big thank you to Pastor Perkins for this preaching opportunity as part of today's virtual service. The scripture of Daniel chapter 3, verses 15 through 29 have been read, and I want to highlight two verses, the last part of verse 15 and the entire verse of 17. The last part of verse 15 says, "And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" And verse 17 says, "If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king." And from that entire passage, and with those two highlights in mind, I like to preach the sermon titled, "But If Not." We are facing fiery trials, and believers are not the only ones in this extraordinary season. These trying times have hit us with the harsh reality that bad things happen to us all. 2020 has affected everyone, everywhere, in some way. The pestilence of COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on every territory of the globe. All sorts of isms have reared their ugly heads and run rampant and made a grand show of alarming disparities over class, color, gender, and other distinctions of humanity, and how we treat those who are in the end all made in the image of God. Power struggles in politics are daily realities and glaringly disaffect the least of these, while governments play seesaw between people and profits, neither side willing to yield to bring systematic balance. It's all or none, which renders an impasse in which many people suffer. It is, as the song says, tragedies are commonplace. The third chapter of Daniel describes such a time of playground politics that had deep spiritual consequences, and I believe that much of what we are dealing with in these testing times will also at its core reveal the same. In all of the battles we face, the biggest one will always be, whom will you serve? In the midst of police brutality, economic hardships, and interpretations of what it means to be free in this country, we are still beset with the accusatory question, what is the church doing about this? This pandemic, with its stay-at-home and social distancing necessities, have shuttered church buildings and scattered believers to find community in social media and taught us to be the priests of our own households. In times like these, brothers and sisters, it is when our faith is tried and tested and we look for the good Lord to come and see about us. I'm not talking about a surface test to see if we dare call congregations to in-person services as a statement of political right or biblical reasoning. We are seeing this in reported COVID parties, which remind me of the Garden of Eden, where humans wait to see what happens if we do the thing we've been told could cause us to surely die. I'm talking about how we will respond when the world gangs up on us and pushes us to prove our allegiance to any person, place, or thing that is not the true and living God. Can we find it within ourselves to stand firm when the world plays a tune and commands us to worship what we know is not our God? Can we refuse to bow under political pressure and be okay with being the only ones left standing? Can we face our accusers and articulate, as Peter admonished, the reason why we still believe? These were the challenges of these young men, transplants from Jerusalem, of the sons of Judah, when they faced a season of testing. They had been kidnapped from their native land because of their potential as converts in a new nation that didn't regard their God nor their heritage as worthy of respect. They had collectively passed one test recorded in the first chapter of Daniel that could have brought them starvation or death when they refused to eat the king's food, intended to indoctrinate them to the culture and give them a taste of a so-called superior lifestyle. They passed that test when they were found to be healthier and in better condition than those who rejected what had been called inferior. They went through another test in the second chapter, as all were judged by the failures of some to interpret the king's nightmare that he would be losing his place as a world power to a kingdom that would stand forever. In each of these tests, their powerful captors had to submit to the power of God to take care of the people called by his name. In this test in the third chapter, where we can also see ourselves, these young men are confronted for failing to engage in the patriotism of the nation. There was a legal decree that a tune be played at whose sound the hearer was to fall down and worship the image of the king or be thrown into a fiery furnace. It was brought to the attention of the king that when the anthem was played, these three young men did not pay proper respects to that image. They would not serve the gods or worship as prescribed and mandated by the king. This was told to a volatile king known to react with rage when he did not get his way, with the expectation that he would lash out at those who had offended him. He gave them one last chance to bow down to the image he had made of himself with the threatening question, "And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" These men didn't make any excuses, they didn't grovel for mercy, but they took a stand for what they believed about God. As far as they were concerned, whether the king or the nation were offended, they would only worship the true and living God, who needed no image, who needed no music, who needed no legal decree, but who warranted praise and glory for being God all by himself. The king unleashed his fury by turning up the heat of the furnace and ordering that they be cast into it. Doing so caused his own people to be hurt while executing this over-the-top punishment for breaking a law that served only his ego. This king was so insistent on this punishment that he stayed and watched for himself that they pay for what they did to him. But when he looked in the furnace, he didn't see three men, he saw four. None of them bound, all of them still on their feet and unharmed. When he ordered the three men out of the furnace and had them examined, there were no burns, there were no singes, and there was no smell of smoke. The king, in all his power for a third time, declared that God was indeed and in fact God, and made an official announcement that there is no other God who can deliver like this. My brothers and sisters, no matter how many times those in the seats of power say we have it all under control, we can hold fast to the true and living God. God has his own way through every test and every trial of showing that he is the only one who can deliver, and he will be the only one who can see about us in times of intense testing. I believe today, brothers and sisters, more than ever, that we must reset into a but if not position of faith that says God will be our God no matter what. I leave you with three things to remember so that as you go through your season of testing, you too can go through the fiery furnace of extraordinary testing, no matter what, with a but if not faith. The first thing we must do is retain our faith, no matter where we find ourselves in this world. These three men had a faith heritage and believed that the same God that they had learned to trust in Jerusalem would be with them while in Babylon. Do you believe that God has more power than those nouns of our culture, those persons, places, and things? You've got to hold on to your faith that God is bigger than COVID-19, more powerful than a president, the only true and living God. You must believe that God is able to do exceedingly above all that we can ask, think, or imagine. You must reject any lie that God is not big enough, that God is not strong enough, that God is not God enough to keep you standing when things go wrong. There is only one God who rules earth and heaven, and nothing will separate us from his love. Stand on his word and retain your faith. The second thing we have to do is we must remember our testimony, no matter how hot it gets on our most difficult days. I recited these tests to show that these three men had known God firsthand as a strong deliverer. And you have too. God has a proven track record in your life as making a way out of no way. Don't save those moments for testimony, for service. Encourage yourself with those testimonies in the Lord. Think of his goodness to you. Doors he opened, ways he made, protection and provision he set before you. If he did it before, he can do it again. We may feel like we are running out of options, but God can do anything but fail. Remember what he's done. Keep in mind that no matter the threat before us, we've got a God behind us that has always come through for us. And finally, we must receive our fate. These young men made a decision to let God choose the outcome. They made a choice to stick with God, with the God that they knew was all powerful. They decided not to follow the king's edict, and they are in danger of the king's wrath. The situation is bleak and it looks like it's all over, but these young men, by standing up for God, left room for God to stand up with them. The powerful king in their day, as well as ours, has said what he has to say, but the last word always rests with God. God was still able, and God could deliver, and whatever God decided, these young men trusted that he would be with them all the way. That's what this passage teaches. Retain your faith, remember your testimony, and receive your fate. It's God's turn. He can stop pestilence with a word, but if not, it's God's turn. He can protect us when we are under attack for what he called us to be, but if not, it's God's turn. We follow his direction, we do his will, and the rest is on him. And we hope he'll rescue us from the evil of this world. But if not, times of testing and trauma will challenge and update what we think we know about God. These difficult days force us to trust and believe that God can deliver and that we will survive what is attacking us. But if not, we must make a decision still that we will not forsake our God. The young men knew going in the furnace that they may not make it out of there, and they refused to forsake him. They were at the mercy of folks who didn't believe in their God, and they trusted in him all the way through the furnace. We don't know who will survive this global health crisis or how it will affect those who came through their illness. We don't know who our president will be after the elections. We don't know when blackness will no longer be criminalized. We walk through each day with fewer and fewer answers for all we see and hear happening these days. But I want you to hold on to your faith. I want you to remember that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I want you to know that our times are ultimately in God's very capable hands. Your fate is not in the hands of man. There is no power on earth that can separate us from the love of God. We've taken some big hits through all of this, and for many, our lives will never be the same. I don't know how it will turn out when all is said and done. I can't say if we'll feel better or worse when this is all over. God didn't say we'd always look better than when we went through it. Jacob walked away with a limp, and Jesus still had open wounds in his body after the grave. What I do know is that God promised to be with us always, even to the ends of the earth. Not just until the end of our lives, not just until we get to the grave. May the empty tomb where they laid Jesus be our sure reminder that God promised he will never leave us nor forsake us. Our worst day is still a tick in eternity. No matter what we face, no matter the trial or the test, no matter the temperature in the furnace, one thing is sure: God is with us, and God will be with us on the other side of whatever it is we must go through. He can deliver, but if not, stand for God, stand with God, and trust him to transform every experience for our witness and always for his glory. God bless you and be well.